Hi folks, welcome to this recording on participating preferred shares. Now, in order for us to do some of these independent cases, we're going to look at some data that's common to all of them. We want you to assume the following for each independent case. We know that the number of common shares that are issued and outstanding are 54,000 and the number of preferreds that are issued and outstanding are 18,000. And note that because we're trying to calculate dividend allocation, we need to know the number of shares outstanding. We're not interested in this point on the amount of money that the preferred and the common shareholders have given us to get these number of shares. Okay, so this is strictly a number, not a dollar figure. So the preferred share dividend is 75 cents a share, and don't forget, if we have any form of participation, all right, the match, if it's applicable, is going to come in at $1 a share, meaning that if any level of participation is going to be offered in each of these cases, the common shareholders need to get their match before the preferred shareholders participate partially or fully. So this knowing the match when we have that situation is very important. So now let's look at the first situation here, which says in case A, we have preferreds that are cumulative, non-participating, and they're in arrears for 3 years prior to the current year. So if we set up a little schedule here to determine how much each different type of shareholder is going to get, we can look here to see that in 3 years prior, we know that we had 18,000 shares issued and outstanding. Our question told us they were going to get a 75-cent per share dividend, and we have to clean up the arrearages first. Why? Because they're cumulative preferred shares. So of the 64,800 that are going to be allocated in dividends this year, the first 40,500 are going to go to settle the arrearages. All right. Now, in the current year, who's going to get what? Well, they're non-participating, so you don't need to worry about the match here. All you know is that the preferred are going to get 75 cents a share, which is 13,500. So now, if we know that we're paying out in total 64,008, then we know so far we would have allocated 54,000, which means the last 10,800 here, okay, is going to be allocated to our common shareholders because they are the residual shareholders. Now, the question asked us to calculate how much of the dividend will go to each share type. 54,000 is going to go to the preferred, and 10,800, which is the balance of the total dividend declared that year, would go to common. Now, the question also asked you to calculate the amount of per share dividends payable on the common and preferred. So all we did here, to be honest, I'm not really sure of the significance or why they asked you to do it in each case, but in any case, how would we do it? Well, I'm calculating a per share dividend on the preferred here of $3 a share. And how am I going to get that? Well, I know that the total amount of dividends that the preferred shareholders got was 54,000, and the total number of shares that are issued and outstanding are 18,000. So 54,000 divided by the number of shares that are issued is going to give me the total dollar value of the dividend paid this year on a per share basis. So it's equivalent to $3 a share, and the common shareholders got the equivalent of 20 cents a share because they got $10,800 in dividends this year, and that's divided by the number of shares issued. So they've got 20 cents per share. All right. Now, don't forget, this is not the normal dividend. The stated dividend here for the preferred is 75 cents a share. Okay, so now let's go to the next case, and the next case tells us that we have preferred. Now, in this case, they're non-cumulative and non-participating, so this is actually even easier than case A because we know there's no arrearages to be paid to the preferred shareholders, so they're simply getting their annual allotment based on the 75 cents a share. So now in this case, we were told that we're declaring 40,500 in dividends. So the total amount of dividends that are going to preferred are going to be 13,500, and to common would be 27,000. And we can see in this case that the per share dividend on the preferred is exactly what it was when what we were given up here, right, which is 75 cents a share, because that's the current year dividend, and that's all these guys are getting is their current year dividend. Okay, so that's case B. And again, realize that of the 40,500 that we're declaring this year, the common shareholders are getting the residual after the preferred get theirs. Okay? So now let's look at case C, and you can betcha we're going to have some level of participation here. And here we have that the preferred shares are not only cumulative and in arrears for 2 years before the current year, they're fully participating, but their participation is going to be based on the relative total annual base dividend, that's the dollar-based dividend for the current year, after the common received their match. Now in this case, we were told that we're going to allocate a total of $120,000 in dividends that have been declared this year. So now what are we going to do with this question? Well, the first thing we need to do is let's clear up those arrearages, right? So in arrears, we have 2 years for the preferreds, and again, because they're cumulative, we got to clear up the arrearages. 18,000 shares, 75 cents a share is the stated dividend. So 27,000 of that 120,000 is going to be allocated to the arrearages on the preferred shares. Now, let's look at the current year. In the current year, the preferreds would get paid before the common, $13,500, and that's based on the regular 75-cent dividend that's stated, times 18,000 shares that are currently issued and outstanding, and that's going to be $13,500 allocated to the preferred shareholders. So now, before there's any participation, don't forget, we have to give the common their match before we calculate how much participation dividend they get. So the match is $1 a share. So we know that we have 54,000 common shares out there. So before we give the preferred shareholders anything over and above their annual entitlement for the year, we have to give these common shareholders their 54,000. So therefore, now we see that in the current year, we allocated how much? We allocated $13,500 so far in the current year to preferreds, and we allocated $54,000 so far, which is the match to common. So now we've got to allocate how much more? Well, if we do a little bit of quick math here, we'll find that of the 120,000 that we declared this year, we need to allocate an additional 25,500. All right, that includes the 27,000 plus the 13,500 plus the 54,000. When you add up all those guys and deduct it from what you declared this year, the remaining dividend to be declared to the preferred and common, okay, is going to be 25,500. So that's the piece that the preferred can participate in. But don't forget, their participation is full, but it's based on the relative total annual base dividend, and the annual base dividend does not include arrearages. It only includes the current year, which is why I highlighted these guys in red. So this 25,500 is going to be allocated on the proportion of total current year dividends for each share type, preferred and common. So how do we figure out those proportions? Well, I'm telling you they're 20% and 80%, but how did I get that? Well, I would say that the preferred are getting $13,500 divided by the total current annual dividend, which would be $67,500, which are these two red guys here, right? So $13,500 divided by $67,500, if you put that in your calculator, you should get 0.2 or 20%. So these guys are going to get 20% of $25,500, which is going to be equal to, and I'll just do it down. Well, let's see if I can get it down here. 20% times 25,500, and that's going to be equal to 5,100. And that's where we get this number in here. That's our 5,100 right there. Okay, so now what else does that mean? That means that the common are going to get 80%. Now you can calculate that too. You can take 54,000, which is the entitlement that the common are getting in a regular year because they got their match, and divide it by the full 67.5, which is the total current year based on the annual dividend, the total current year allocation. Okay, now don't forget, when we're calculating the amount of the participation, we don't include the arrearages. We're only looking at the current. So we know technically that if of this 25.5, these guys got 5,100, these guys are getting the balance. But calculate it to be sure, because you might have made a math there, right? And you should get 20,400, which is exactly what we've got up above here. So now what do we know? We know that the total dividend declared to the preferred shareholders this year is going to be 45,600. So if we take that and divide it by 18,000, we're going to get the per share dividend, obviously more than 75 cents a share, right? Because they're getting the arrearages plus a little participation, right? These guys are getting $1.38. Even though they don't get arrearages, they're getting, of that extra dividend that we've declared, they're getting a little piece of it, 20,400. So they're getting a little bit more than their match, right? They're getting, in essence, $1.38 a share on average. Okay? So now, you might want to take some time to digest that a little bit to make sure you understand fully participating shares, preferred shares, because we're going to go on to do some partially participating now. Okay, so you might want to take a little break and come back in a few minutes once you've had a chance to replay or digest this. Now, I'm going to move on to situation D, and in this case it says they are partially participating based on the relative total annual base dividend up to an additional 90 cents after the common receive their match. So don't forget, these guys are regularly getting 75 cents a share, so they have an opportunity to get up to $1.65 a share, which is their stated dividend of 75 cents plus an additional 90 cents. That gives us $1.65. But will they get that or not? Let's have a look. So now, in this case, there's nothing in arrears, so we don't have to worry about that. So in the current year, we know that those guys, of the full 160,000 that we said in our question, are assuming that they're going to be able to get, that they're declaring, the company's declaring, these preferred shareholders are going to get their current year dividend. Again, there's no arrearages, so they're getting 13,500 right off the top. But there's no participation until the common get their match. So before we can calculate participation, we have to give 54,000 to the common, because don't forget their match is $1 a share, and we have 54,000 shares issued and outstanding. Now, let's look at if the participation. The amount that's available for participation and to common is 92,500, because that's what's left to shore us up to 160,000, which is the dollar value of the dividend that the company declared this year. We just have to figure out now how much of this 92,500 are the preferred shareholders getting because they have partial participation, and how much are the common getting. Now don't forget, none of this gets allocated until the common get their match, and the common didn't get their match until the preferred shareholders got their piece. So this was a plug. We plugged it. Just like up here in case C, we plugged this too, right? We're plugging this guy. We're plugging it so that we shore it up to 160,000 because that's the amount of the dividend that was declared. So now, let's look at the ratio. So again, because it's based on the relative total annual base dividend, the regular dividend in the year would have been 13,500 to preferreds divided by the total amount of dividend paid that year, which would have been 13,500 and 54,000. All right, that gives us our 20%, right? So now, of that 20%, all right, we would say, well, they could conceivably get 20% of 92,500, but that would give us 18,500. But don't forget their cap. The additional dividend they can get is 90 cents per share. Well, 90 cents per share is 16,200. And this additional piece, whenever it says they're partially participating, that is the cap. Whatever the partial participation is the cap. So you need to compare this cap to what they would have gotten if they were fully participating, which would have been 18.5. They can't get that. Why? Because the cap is smaller. So they're only getting the cap, because the cap is less than what they would have got if they were fully participating. So you should always compare it. Okay? So now they get their cap, right? So the balance of this number that we plugged would go to the common. So now we have a total dividend declared to those preferred shareholders of $29,700, which is going to give us $1.65 a share. And that makes sense because they did get their additional 90 cents a share, didn't they? Right? They didn't get $18,500 because that would assume full participation. This is the cap. So therefore, that's what they get. So now the common are getting $130,300, and on a per share basis, that's $2.41. Far cry from $1 a share, but that's because they got this big balloon payment because the company actually issued a dividend declared a dividend of $160,000, and preferred shareholders got part of it, so the common got the balance. So now that concludes our review of participating preferred shares and dividend allocation.